Hello and welcome once again on day 3 of 20th World Education Summit, School Education. Moving on further, we have a panel discussion on leadership of school in emergent scenario. And for this, we have panelists starting from Mr. Ashish Gulati, Vice Chairman, Bluebells Group of School, Gurugram. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Payam Shoghi, Principal, Venkateshwar Signature School, Raipur. Welcome, sir.
So much. Thank you.
Ms. Sailaja Vittaldev, Principal, Silver Ong International School, Bangalore. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Ms. Prabha Dixit, Principal, Oscar Arbol International School, Chennai. Welcome, ma'am.
Hello and thank you.
And last, we have Dr. Vidhukesh Vimal, Headmaster, the Assam Valley School, Tezpur. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much.
This session is moderated by Ashish Gulati, sir. I'm just handing over the virtual dice to Ashish, sir. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome to all the panelists, and I must congratulate the organizers for having put together this distinguished panel to talk about something that's very sensitive and very critical. Leadership is something that's not only critical, but is also much talked about. A simple Google search on leadership will reveal millions of results on Google. And it's a topic that needs to be deliberated upon and understood in great depths. Because someone once said that show me a good school and I will show you a good principal. On that note, I would open the discussion to the panelists, and I would request the panelists to spend a minute each to share their views about school leadership in particular, and then we take it on from there. May I invite Mr. Shoghi to please open the discussion and share his views on leadership, on school leadership in particular.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm grateful to the organizers for having me. 1 minute. I wish to, during the course of this panel discussion, present a few practical thoughts. You see, we wear different hats, so we can come up with a lot of theories about leadership styles and all of that, but I would like to present a different perspective today, given the chance to speak a little bit more. You see, I have been a student, so I work in schools, I've studied in schools where there were principals, so I've seen principals in action, I've seen leadership in action. Then I started my career as a teacher, I've seen again principals in action. Then as a parent, my children went to school, I interacted with principals of those schools as well. And then I became a trainer. Somewhere along the line, I took up training of teachers, and then I came across a lot of principals and leadership. And of course, today as a principal myself, I have developed certain perspectives of leadership in schools from within. And I wish to present those perspectives here, which are not theoretical, these are based on things that we actually see happen. And I find that there are certain areas of improvement that we have to think about. We have to find ways of doing that. So I believe that the time is ripe to do that. After all, now the air settling, the pandemic and schools opening up, we have to think about a fresh beginning. And I think this seminar, this webinar, this panel discussion is very timely for that.
Sure, thank you very much, sir. And I would now request Sailaja ma'am to share her views on school leadership in particular.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, organizers, for having me in this imminent show. My perspective about leadership is about, it's all about the people, how you bond with the people, and what is that, how you develop the trust factor with the team, and what is shared leadership is what I believe in. It's not a one-man show. We are all as a team together, and our purpose is the same. So I would like to elaborate maybe on this in due course. So that's all about. Shared leadership is what I believe.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Very, very well said. Leadership is a practice. While it operates through the agency of individuals, it is still a shared practice, like you very appropriately pointed out. And we hope we have time to elaborate on that. And on that note, I would request Dr. Vimal to please share with us his thoughts on school leadership.
Thank you very much. I'll say, school leadership area which is unexplored in this country. If I take Indian context, because what happens, experience is taken into account when you've been promoted or when you're appointed as school leaders, and people think that experience and training are synonym, and that's why they are limited by their experience. As my previous speaker they said, he said, he has seen as a parent, as a student, as a teacher, and that way, so that means your experience is limited. Many times what happens, and this is how you treat people. And I feel that school leadership, and for that matter any leadership, requires training, and which allows you to navigate through difficult times. It allows you to see different perspectives, and also it allows you to provide solutions based on that training. And I personally feel that as a country, we need to look into school leadership a little seriously, and not just based on experience that people are just going up the order and leading schools and kind of working at that place.
Very, very valid point, Dr. Vimal. It's very insightful to hear that experience and training are not synonymous. It takes a certain degree of training and value addition and effort on the part of the agency of a leader to pick up leadership skills and practice leadership as a concept. Uh, it's a point which I hope we'll have time for more elaboration upon. And on that note, I would request Dr. Prabha, uh, ma'am, to please express your thoughts on school leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Gulati, and thank you for inviting me for this discussion this afternoon. Um, I think my co-panelists have very beautifully set the context and those opening thoughts on school leadership, um, and I think as they were speaking, I was just reminded of an anecdote, something that happened a couple of years ago in a conversation with somebody. On school leadership, and this person has nothing to do with schools. And her, uh, the thought that she shared with me was that she never imagined that schools and leadership were two words that would actually be spoken in the same context. She said for a long time she thought that the school is a space where children come learn and go. Why are we talking about leadership over here? They have to just learn their English, math, science, social studies and go. And what is it got to do with leadership, right? But it took her many years of actually engaging, working with school leaders when she began to understand how this is such a like many of the co-panelists have said, it's an unexplored territory in some ways, but it's extremely crucial. It's very, very important because leaders in a school, it's a journey for leaders, and they have to keep constantly growing. And as they are doing, they're also working with impacting the lives of other teachers in the school, the students in the school, and so on. So I think it's a very, very important aspect to speak about. And I hope through the course of this afternoon's conversation, we're going to be able to touch on some of those areas of what really a school leader's role is.
Very well said, ma'am. I think uh, with innocent ignorance, some people may tend to see leadership as a set of activities, whereas leadership is something that's a thought process. It's something that is much deeper than a set of activities which pertain to the day-to-day working of the school. And like you said, children just learn and come and learn and go. Where is the need for leadership? In that context, we then need to ask the question: what do they learn? How do they learn? What is in what environment and culture do they learn? And how does leadership shape that ecosystem in which the students learn? On that note, Let me start by posing a question uh, on how do you think school leadership differs from leadership of other organizations? And I would request any of the panelists to please pick up the thread and elaborate on that. Please, Dr. Vimal.
Uh, I think in school, one of the biggest difference is your end user client, fine, if I may use the word, and the age difference between the service provider, like the people, those who are working for them, and uh, and those who are at the receiving end. Fine, this difference of age kind of gives us such a scope where, and there are different, and in the middle there are different stakeholders. They bring different kind of perspectives. For example, a parent, they want to live their life through their child, and this is how it's kind of a become a no kind of a dummy presence of the parent in the class. So in other lead, if you look at kind of say in any other organization or any other sector, fine, you are meeting real people. You may be meeting difficult people, but a they are of your age. That's why it's become easy to communicate. It's become easy to kind of share things, and you are at the same level. But when your client and when your kind of service providers, that there are two different days, and then there are different variables that includes parent, that includes other stakeholders, and which are going to influence your thing on a very routine basis, on a regular basis. It becomes more dynamic, and at the same time it requires huge amount of detailing and understanding of those details.
Yeah, that's the context in which the school education operates is very different. As you said, you're not dealing with people of your own age. You're dealing with students as young as 3 years to 18 years at least of age. So the context places different demands on leadership. And on that note, I see Shailja ma'am wanting to bring in her perspective on how school leadership differs from leadership of other organizations.
As my co-panelist, Mr. Vimal mentioned, very rightly said, parents lead through their children, definitely their dreams. But I feel, personally, I feel that we are dealing with human beings, not human doings. There is a lot of emotion involved, to understand. But 3-year-old, or 4-year-old, or 7-year-old, or 12-year-old, or 18-year-old, what do they want, and what, and how, and why? If these three things are clear, of course, any organization for that matter, what, how, and why is definitely there in any organization. But how do you put those things, and what lot of emotional involvement with the students and the community, parents, and all the stakeholders of the organization plays a vital role. It's not that just the school management or the teachers or the students or the parents. All of us, we share that vision. We want our students to be like this. So that is what the personal touch is, what I feel schools provide. I mean, that is the only difference between the schools or any other organization, is what I feel about it.
Yeah, very well said, ma'am. Thank you very much for that insightful perspective. I did see Mr. Shoghi wanting to bring in his perspective.
Yes,
on the-
thanks so much. I wish to take this discussion a little further because it's clear that there is no other area of application similar to what we do in schools. Even in the field of education, you talk about technical education, higher education, nothing ever compares with school education. It has its own priorities, it has its own dynamics, it has its own set of objectives, aims, and it's unlike any other. But then what do we see? We see, for example, in order to run a school, we we borrow ideas and concepts from other areas, from other fields, from corporate. For example, you have HRs coming up in schools. Has anybody really thought about what an HR should look like in a school? Because we know how HR evolved in the corporate sector, but what about the school? We have CEOs now in schools. Has anybody really thought, is it based on any kind of knowledge of research or understanding of how these ideas that have evolved in a different setting now come into application in schools? So this is a major problem, and this is one of the things I have noticed from within. Without thinking, we borrow ideas, we borrow processes, we borrow systems, and we put them in our schools. And anyway, the school will run any which way. But then, what does that do? We keep talking about the lowering of the stature and prestige of teachers over the years. The whole concept of guru in Indian civilization, Indian tradition, the guru had a very high station. What happened? Now, a lot of it, of course, is because of the educationists themselves, teachers themselves. But I think this thoughtless approach to leadership in a school, where we just are interested in running things any which way, is also resulting in that. Sometimes the communication, the kind of communication we have with our teachers, the way we address them, they're very curt, they're very black and white. They deserve better. And these are again borrowed from outside. They are borrowed in the vocabulary and the system of communication in the corporate sector, which we have brought into our school. They have no place in our schools for these things. They are different. Our teachers are putting their heart and soul in their work, and they go unappreciated. On top of that, then they have this really dry, drab, and curt, I would say, system that goes with it. So while we understand that our system of education, school education, is very different, but then we also need to understand that we are doing a lot of harm also to our own system and the stakeholders in it.
Yes, that's resonates very well with a lot of literature, which is and a lot of research which is going into school education leadership now. In fact, it is heartening to note that there is research and training specific to school leadership by our own National Institute of Education Planning and Administration, and it is very very appropriate, and there is a whole lot of debate around the colonization of school leadership by the corporate styles of leadership, which may not be the best for schools and for education and the purpose for which schools exist. I think it's a very very vast area. It's a very very keenly researched and keenly debated area worldwide, because corporatization is colonizing every area. It's a neo capitalism, which is through corporate colonization of every kind of organization, and like it has been enumerated, that this purpose of existence of schools is very different from that of purpose of existence of many many other organizations, which uh, have a transactional nature of existence, which applies to goods and services. Where if we look at and placing it in context, while organizations who add value by way of manufacturing or trading in goods have more of a transactional nature, even the service industry, which comes closest, being hospitality or being healthcare, is something which is again very different from school education, because the level of engagement with, let's say, a healthcare provider is not as high as that with a school. A healthcare provider, let's to put it in nuts and bolts, um, if a person goes to the hospital, he doesn't intend to stay in a hospital for years. He's there because he needs some care which cannot be done at home, and he's there for, let's say, 10 days, 15 days, maybe a month, and then he's back. And whereas a school is a 15-year of engagement, that's in context of time frame, and it is a place where there is a transformation of the child from a child to a young adult to being an adult. So, on that note, uh, I would request Prabha ma'am to share her perspective on how she thinks school leadership is different from leadership of other organizations.
Um, I think essentially, in addition to whatever we've heard from the voices of others, uh, I think two other things that stand out to me that are significantly different are, one is, I think, given the nature of the work involved for school leaders, I mean, we know that on a day-to-day basis, schools are very, very busy spaces. I mean, there's a lot that happens. Even if school is an online world, there's a lot that happens because it's the business of teaching, learning. So there needs to be absolute attention from everybody in the school on what's going on within classrooms. In parallel, when we talk of the day-to-day, the day-to-day administration and management of things, it could be in the form of responding to parents, or planning and organizing events. It could be, if we were in the physical world, of course there's also the additional aspects of safety and security, all of those as well, which are, you really cannot take your attention away even for a minute from that day-to-day operation. But alongside, school leaders cannot lose sight of the longer term vision. So it's essentially one person trying to run two races in two different spaces, and they are both equally important, right? And I think that's a significant difference between, we talk of CXOs and other industries and organizations, and the equivalent of them, the principals and heads of schools, or maybe even the mid-level leaders in a school. They need to have their eye on both all the time, and I think that's a significant difference. The other aspect that's coming to my mind now is the notion of time. um, uh, Education is essentially a necessity. Unlike most other industries, which tends to become, it's nice to have, or it comes in the space of luxury, or any of those, education and learning are essentially necessities. When we recognize that, I think the whole idea of time, and the dimension of time, is something that becomes very, very significant in a school setting, because we're talking about psychological, socio-emotional development of children. And then you lose them at those particular age, when the development is happening biologically, neurologically. You can't go back and, whatever you do, you really cannot go back and make up for the time at a later point in time. Unlike other industries where you have a product, or you have a service, right? You give a product life cycle, or you have a service, you still talk about, okay, you didn't get it right this time, can we adjust the timeline? It's not that schools are fail-proof zones. I don't mean it like that. Of course, we should allow for failure to happen. We should be able to learn from that, reflect, and move on. But definitely, the dimension of time is something I feel is a lot more significant in the space of a school.
Sure, ma'am. If I may, with your permission, rephrase it, what I heard from you is that the the leadership of a school places immense demand on the agency of the person in the leadership position, with all the expectations of the logistics and operations of the school on one hand, the compliances on the other hand, and the core task of child development as the most significant and the most transformational activity, which makes a school different from any other organization. So, the leadership in schools wear many hats. Um, uh, there is a managerial hat that school leadership wears, and I deliberately use the word leadership because I'll borrow from Selja ma'am. Like she said, it's not a one man show. So it's a teamwork. It's a practice. It's a thought process, and I refrain from using the word philosophy, but it's definitely a lot of thought, and your very being that reflects in your practice as a leader. uh, and it's a multi-layered practice which people in the leadership position, because while we do believe that leadership is a practice, it is on ground practice through the agency of the people in leadership positions. So there's a layering of the person wearing the hat of a managerial transactional leader. There could be a layering of which demands a lot of self development, value addition to self. There is the whole organization dynamics and the dynamics of group and the complexity which operates. There is also the timeline, like ma'am said, is very important. You cannot afford to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, and maybe you can come to school again." And we know how much many of us want to relive our school times because of the regrets that we have. So we just can't afford to do that. And then, of course, there is the entire focus on instruction, on the transformation that the students go through. And that brings me to the question of what are some of the significant changes in the schools in the last 5 to 7 years. And why I say 5 to 7 years is because the world has changed very fast in the last 5 to 7 years, including the pandemic times, which required us to be very proactive. And what kind of demand do you think this change that you have seen, that you have experienced in the last 5 to 7 years, what kind of demands does it place on the leadership? And I would request Dr. Vimal to take a lead on that string of the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question. I think awareness and because in last 5 6 years, if I may say, the way information being shared with parents and the way they've been kind of expecting things, and I think I'll take the lead from where the status of teacher as a guru and Brahma and that level where you're thinking about kind of it has changed to that level to someone who's providing the services, and people start demanding a certain kind of things. So one of the biggest change which I see as a school leader is the approach of parents, where they started demanding. Earlier, this demand was limited to a very high-end school. But now, if you look at this, demand has come down to, in fact, government schools, where the parent bodies are very much demanding the kind of things schools are providing, and they're not taking things at a face value. So that means accountability from the school side and school leadership side. You need to be very much there, and you can't. We cannot. No one can afford to be ignorant, and no one can afford to kind of make excuses on that line. That's A. B part is, there's so much of legality, there's so much of other kind of aspect which came into place, and that's why school leadership needs to be very much aware as far as your legal limitations and your legal obligations are concerned. And that's why it's very one can choose to be ignorant about some of the legal obligations 10 years back or 20 years back, but in today's time you need to be very much aware of those things, and compliances are very much aware. The third part I'll say, in the last 5 years, to challenge of ever evolving school, and rather than competing with anyone else, is basically to remain relevant in your own way, and that's why to remain relevant, you need to compete with yourself, and the focus on say professional development, the focus on ensuring the right kind of culture where people feel non-threatened and people grow. And when I say grow, I'm not only talking about teachers, I'm talking about support staff, I'm talking about everyone, all the stakeholders inside the school, how you grow. Because if they are not growing, your school will not grow. Everyone needs to be on the same page. And because everyone has to understand how the school is functioning, what are the challenges, what are the expectations. And if the school is not focused on this particular part and is not relevant, they are losing their position in the market, they are losing their position in the society, wherever, because every second day, and especially I'm talking from perspective of boarding school, because people come from different parts. Now day schools and good day schools are coming up in every city and every place. Now in that case, if you're not relevant and you don't offer something which others can't offer, then in that case, the chances are very high that over the period of time, you will lose that charm and you lose that position and that aspiration. If you're not a school of dream for people, then somehow you're going to lose your position. That's something pushes every school leader to think about it. And you can't be sitting in the basking the glory of the past that I have done this. You need to do something on a daily basis and to remain relevant.
Sure, sir. That's very insightful. While we can appreciate the rise of awareness amongst the parent community, and we can look at it in light of increasing social democracy and not electoral democracy, though. But in terms of social democracy, we also need to flag the fact that democracy, so including social democracy, needs a certain kind of deal of maturity uh, in the in the body that demands participation in as a stakeholder, which at times can make the situation very complex, where there are unrealistic demands, but we can nevertheless celebrate the social democratic growth that is happening. Uh, the other aspect which I heard you highlight is the fact that you have to run the treadmill. You cannot rest on your laurels. Is again can be looked at in um, from two aspects. The first aspect is that there is more availability of quality education, which which is happening, but nevertheless, it can also be looked at upon as a hegemony from the corporate world, wherein marketization and market forces uh, make it imminent for schools to take a market approach, which has its own pros and cons. Um, uh, while that's a reality, it is also a reality that the education, the reach of education, is also increasing, and is the quality education is becoming more and more available, which very well resonates with your point about the demands on government-sponsored schools also. And may I request Selja ma'am, you've been very patiently uh, listening to the discussion. May I request you to please share your experience of what are the significant changes that you've seen, and what kind of demands do you think it places on leadership?
As my co-panelist, Mr. Vimal, rightly mentioned, that you constantly evolve. You can't rest on your laurels, definitely. But what is that you want for your students end of the year, day, like when they are passing out of your school? So you have an end vision there. So this is what I want my students to be like this. So what is that you want to do? So that becomes like, like I said, shared leadership means shared vision. So what is the vision of the school, and how do we own that vision? Each one of us, each stakeholder has to believe in what school is aspiring to achieve. So that I think we are becoming more informed about it as parents, as students, as teachers, as management, or all of us together, we work towards that. So that's the biggest change I have seen it as a parent, as a student, and then as a teacher, as a coordinator, and as a principal right now. So I have seen all the roles, every time we come up with something, you can't rest, you need to constantly upskill yourself. Okay, then when we are working on the professional development, so our teachers are taking it, and again they are bringing it back to the school and passing it on to their colleagues. So once they understand something which is really benefiting the large community in the school, so how do we share it with others? So we all have the same purpose. We all have the same purpose. So end of the day, our commitment is towards the students, benefit. So how do we work towards it? So that's major change. Everybody is able to visualize what we want and how we want and why we need all these three things together. So that is the biggest, learning for me, entire my journey. And more than that, creating a kind of comfort and, trusting the people when you are delegating the work. Of course, you are responsible and accountable as a head of the school. But, when you are, as I said, it is not one man show. All of us have to work to go together to achieve those common goals. So that is where I feel, each and every part of the organization or all the stakeholders come together, understanding together, and giving their best to achieve those common goals is what I really appreciate. All the teachers as well as the management for trusting the team and giving all the resources and the support. So it was even the management also takes a lot of interest in the enhancing the skills of the teachers, as well as social and emotional needs of the teachers and the students and the parents. Even if we receive any concern from the parent, where is it coming from? We are trying to empathize and understand and see how we can work together as a team. So that is the biggest change is what I feel.
Sure, ma'am. May I request Mr. Payam Shoghi to share his perspective on this?
Thank you, sir. I think one of the things that's very clear that over a period of time has changed is our affinity for involving technology in our work. And by extension, we've become more creative, more innovative. So technology is an aid for outpouring of innovation and creativity, which got accelerated during the pandemic. So we were totally dependent on, and the entire affinity towards technology percolated to the lowest levels that you could imagine inside the school. So this is something which was very welcome. We could get to know a lot of new things, and we would gather for principals meetings, and we would get examples of things that are happening. It was very at a fast rate, and that was happening. And I think this is going to only become more and more, and it's going to be reinforced and continue. That's one. The other thing I think has happened is that we become more open. In our schools, we become more open. But I believe that this is grudgingly happening, but because of government policies and also during the pandemic, we have had to interact more freely with parents, and we have, I say grudgingly because we sometimes feel that parents are an unnecessary intrusion in our work. As a parent, I myself have spent hours sitting to wait to meet the principal of where my child used to study. And finally, I had to take her away from that school because if I cannot meet the principal, then there's no point. So an open door policy and all of that gradually is beginning to happen. But this begs the question, is this here to stay, or is it that we go into our good old ways that once the pandemic ends and we are in a position to again follow our old traditions and norms? Which brings me again to the point of leadership, which is value-based, which is principle-based. It's one of the things that we have to really think about. I'll give you examples. As I said, I will give you examples from within the system. An upcoming school, new school, where you're trying to build up your strength, how does the management work? How does the leadership work? They are open, they're available all the time to the parents. They will go out of their way to address smallest problems that may be there. Why? Because you really cannot turn away anybody at that point of time. The similar thing happens with teachers. You really need them. You have to keep them in good humor. You do all sorts of things to keep your body of teachers happy and enthused because their work will bring in the results that you see. Gradually, the school grows and becomes big and becomes in a position then of strength, and then its policies change. So you become a little bit more closed, and parents have to sit, and they have to wait, and the appointment teachers, and then there's a V line of teachers that you can hire from. Our own ability to work with them changes, but then it's the same organization, it is the same purpose, it's the same objective. So we really need to start thinking in terms of a more principled leadership. If you take out the principle, then we barter our roles as leaders to those of managers. We manage, will somehow run the show. But the leadership that requires what Dixit madam just now mentioned, a vision. I wish to mention take one more minute to talk about this. You see, we have a lot of procedural things on our plate. We sometimes have so much of things to do, managerial things, forms, government regulations, all of that. And we forget where we are. And this is a challenge that I have to always remind my teachers and myself three questions: who we are, where we are, and why are we here? Who we are teachers. Where are we? We are in schools. And why are we here? To serve the best interests of our students. It's very easy to forget this. Teachers get involved in corrections and giving tests and all sorts of things, and they forget really what the central purpose of their existence. We principals, leadership, management, we get into financial matters, into property matters, government issues. We tend to forget that who we are, where we are, and why we are there. So I think that vision has to remain intact, and the principle-based leadership will make sure that these changes that are happening will be sustained and will improve and become better and better. And that's at
Sure.
least
Thank you.
our hope for the future.
Sure. Prabha, ma'am, your perspective on this issue?
I think some very, very important insights have already been shared, and I think very, very valuable. I think one of the things that comes to me is when I was hearing the other panelists talk about the level of awareness is significantly increased amongst parents, and while that can become a double-edged sword, it's good. It can also be sometimes something that uh, as leaders, it becomes probably a point of having to spend time upon. I think as a result of that, one of the things that I think we really see happening more and more, because the parental awareness has increased. As a consequence, the entry level of the students have also, I think, increased significantly. Even when they come to us as early as early learning, they come already being able to do a lot of things, being already able to communicate significantly, knowing quite a bit of the content. So I think that's where the idea of uh, the leadership becoming a pedagogical leader, becoming an instructional leader is very, very important. And I think that role of an instructional leader consequently has really significantly increased in these perhaps in the last 7 or 8 years. The other aspect is, I think, perhaps because the world is changing at such a rapid rate. Many a times, sometimes, over a weekend, when I open the Mint paper to read, there's an article about something. Sometimes I have to go back and actually look up on Google to say, okay, what is this new designation, profession, area of work they are talking about over here? I mean, it's changing so fast that sometimes for us to even get that information, I think it takes several months. And then we begin to recognize to say, oh my God, there's even such a line of work today. Now, I think when we look at schools being really preparatory phases for what is to come in the next phase of a student's life, they need to go into college and obviously get into the world of work after that. I think that's another space where I think schools are really starting to look at how, and I know somebody here did mention the idea of how relevant am I, but I'm also talking about how relevant am I in the context of how rapidly the world is changing. So, what am I really preparing the students for? So, that's where I think the school leader, being a visionary, a futurist, somebody who's keeping his or her eyes on what's happening around, hence needs to happen within my classrooms, not today or tomorrow or day after, but over the next 5 years, 7 years, 8 years, and being able to drive an entire team of teachers, students, and parents becomes something that's important. And I think there's a lot of change in that direction as well in the last perhaps 7 to 8 years.
Very insightful. So it can safely be summarized that we are in a state of flux. There is the school education as a sector is in a state of flux where there are multiple forces operating. There is a historical background in which the schools operate. Uh, there is the rising awareness and um, expectation of the parent and the student community, which uh, is something which is only to be expected, is something that's valid, but is uh, can also become unrealistic. There is also the concerns of the authorities to keep the whole to contain the whole sector so that it does not the complexity and the state of flux it is in does not make it unmanageable space. However, that increases and makes it a manifold, uh, many forces operating at the same time, and increases uh, the kind of complexity in which schools operate. Add to that the realities of the markets, the realities of self-sustainability of independent schools, and we have a whole maze of complexity before us. The other aspect of the school um, um, being an essential service which operates every day in a very planned and rather tight schedule is another challenge, uh, which places a mammoth amount of demand on the leadership, and that demand is also to navigate through the complexity of the flux in which the schools are today. I have I'm keeping a tab on the time, and we have it's already 3:23, and I was told that I have time up till 3:30. Although I would uh, like to extend this discussion by having insights from you about the desirable traits and desirable practices of leadership, but considering the time, I would uh, invite questions from the participants, from the viewers, uh, and throw the platform open to them uh, to address any curiosity that uh, we may have, the panel may have created in the minds of the viewers. May I request the organizers to allow for questions from the audience? Is there a uh,
Yes, sir. We have some question just taking on.
yeah, yeah.
Uh,
You can post it in the chat if you can, and
yes, yes.
I can
So,
read it out for them. If the question is to a particular panelist, please uh,
the delegate not mentioned the particular panelist name. So,
never mind.
yeah.
The first question we have is, as rural learners are not equipped with gadgets, yes, digital disparity is a reality which we must acknowledge and empathize with. We need teachers to meet students by visiting their homes. Yes, I mean, if it is possible, why not? I don't think there can be any two ways about it. Your expectation, um, yeah. This the other question is good idea to start thinking about startup at school level. I haven't really been able to understand this question. Good idea to thinking about startup at school level. Startup, well, most schools start up in a greenfield manner. We haven't come to a point where there is much of acquisition happening in schools. So there is schools are most of them are startups. Yes, you're right. Uh, that's my understanding of the question. Any of the panelists may want to respond. Uh, yeah, please keep posting the questions. If there are any.
So these two relevant question I just find in the chat group. Okay, others are rather than discussion and suggestion rather than a question.
Yeah,
So we can finish it from here onward. So thank you all the speaker for the wonderful discussion on this important panel discussion topic on leadership for a school in the emergent scenario. Thank you all the fellow panelists and the moderator for this session. Moving further, we have start the speaker certificate distribution process as a token of thanks, starting with Mr. Ashish Gulati, Vice Chairman, Bluebells Group of Schools, Gurugram.
Thank
Thank you,
you
sir.
very much. Been a pleasure.
Mr. Payam Shoghi, Principal, Venkateshwar Signature School, Raipur. Thank you so much, sir.
Pleasure. Thank you so much.
Ms. Sailaja Vittaldev, Principal, Silver Onk International School, Bangalore. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the session.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ms. Pratibha Dixit, Principal, Oscar Arbol International School, Chennai. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And the last but not least, Dr. Vidhukesh Vimal, Headmaster, the Assam Valley School, Tezpur. Thank you so much, sir, for this session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Pleasure.
So that's all for this session. We can start. The next session will be start at 5. We'll join over there. Thank you once again for all the panelists.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.